In November of 1984, a movie hit theaters that was so shocking, so transgressive, that it caused protests and boycotts from activist groups around the country, causing the film to be pulled from theaters. And that film was Silent Night, Deadly Night. Yep, in 1984, a killer Santa Claus movie hit the market with a tagline, "You made it through Halloween, now try and survive Christmas." Was this film too terrifying for words? So disturbing that it could not be seen by virgin eyes? Well, no. The controversy started from the marketing of the film, or the portrayal of old Saint Nick as a killing machine. Rosie Knight and myself break down the controversy that momentarily halted the momentum of the film, but in the end gave birth to a 5-film franchise.
All right, everybody. I am here with Rosie Knight, who is, I should say, knows quite a bit about the controversy of Silent Night, Deadly Night, but that is just one of many, many pieces of articles that she has written. And also she's a YA novelist, excuse me, if I could talk. But obviously, she could do a lot better job of telling a little bit about herself than I could. So could you just tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name's Rosie Knight. I write articles about all kinds of stuff, a lot of horror at places like Nerdist, IGN, Hollywood Reporter, Esquire. I also write a lot about comics, and I did recently write a YA comic called The Haunted High Tops. So yeah, I love horror, and I'm super stoked to be here to talk about this grimy, weird movie.
Which, yeah, indeed it is. November 9th, 1984, a small slasher flick hits movie screens across the country, and that is Silent Night, Deadly Night. But what should have been just another addition into the slasher genre turned into a huge controversy. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, when you watch the movie, you can imagine that if people had seen the movie, it would be controversial because it's really grimy. It subverts slashers by being a bit more of a Columbo-esque, why done it, because it's all kind of shown almost from the point of view of the serial killer. We start with him, we know why he becomes the slasher. But the funny thing is, the controversy started before the movie even came out. So it was actually all about the branding. It had absolutely nothing to do with the content of the movie, though when it came out, critics hated it and it was very controversial. And it was all to do with the fact that all the marketing was based on the killer being dressed as Santa Claus, which was just sort of seen as this breaking of some sacrosanct thing, and that it would kind of terrify young kids. I mean, in Variety, they wrote an editorial that said, this was in November 1984, and it was most protests were generated by the feeling of the depiction of Santa Claus, the killer in a Santa Claus suit, would traumatize children and undermine their traditional trust in Santa Claus. And that kind of sums up how weird the controversy was, because it was all about this idea of this axe-wielding Santa. It was just seen as the worst thing you could do.
Yeah, and so, I mean, this isn't even, this is far from the first Christmas-themed horror movie. I mean, Black Christmas was infamous by this point, and it's certainly not the first Santa Claus killer movie, Don't Open Till Christmas. There had even been other Santa Claus killer, but this movie had, with the backing of TriStar, actually had more of a marketing campaign, right? So you saw, Saturday morning / afternoons, there were ads on the, and parents were seeing that, or Monday Night Football. And so it was, the marketing actually had enough money to be airing it, and that's kind of what got them in a little bit of hot water.
Yeah, and the poster, it's like a Santa going down a chimney with an axe, and it's this really kind of, what's made it so kind of iconic and such a cult hit was exactly what made it so controversial. And I mean, it was so controversial that they pulled all the ads for it, I think 6 days after it came out. I mean, in the UK, it actually was never properly released till 2009, because we had such a big problem with the video, we call it video nasties, which obviously you know about, but there was a huge, the BBFC, which is the rating company, the rating kind of corporation, they were just so anti-exploitation movies. I mean, Texas Chainsaw Massacre also was not properly released in the UK till Zeros. So yeah, it's very, very interesting. They actually never even submitted Silent Night, Deadly Night to the BBFC because they knew that they would never get a certification. And then 3 years later, it got denied. because they wouldn't make the cuts that they wanted. And then so I think it was 2009 that it really got released in the UK. So I mean, obviously that didn't stop people from watching it, especially not in the age of the internet, but it is a really interesting experiment in how much you can completely like fuck up a marketing campaign, or controversially make a really incredible marketing campaign that people are talking about, but that stops people seeing the movie. I mean, the movie was pulled as well, so it was just it's a pretty crazy part of history.
But talk about throwing some water onto a grease fire. Siskel and Ebert kind of went after this movie, and that really kind of took it from like kind of maybe a couple of clusters of people in Milwaukee and places like that to kind of more, you know, national controversy because of the two of them.
Oh, 100%. Like, they hated this movie. Lots of critics in general just absolutely hated the movie. They thought it was like horrible, plus and gross, and which it is, but that's kind of what's amazing about it. It's this really grody B movie that, and I mean, that's why I think, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but that's why the sequels, because it spawned like a bunch of sequels, are really interesting, because they all kind of lean less into the slasher aspect and more into this like gross, like kind of noir-y crime horror tone that the movie set up. So, which I'm sure mostly just came from that having a not massive budget. Yeah, no, Siskel and Ebert hated it. I mean, I think it was generally just absolutely reviled by critics, which also I would be very interested to know whether that was like a completely 100% in response to the movie, or whether it was in response to the movie after controversy about the way it was marketed. Because you're right, they were showing like adverts, Little House on the Prairie and Three's Company and stuff. So probably not the best way to market the movie.
Well, and some of this controversy comes from, you know, speaking of people like Siskel and Ebert, and a lot of other critics came after TriStar, who, you know, were kind of the new kids on the block. So it wasn't just going after one of their films, it was going after them as a company, and that kind of put a panic on them. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can't speak to that part like specifically, but it does speculate into it, especially that, I mean, there's so many examples. I was reading about this other, like, I think this was a great marketing campaign. I just don't necessarily know if they targeted at the right people, but like, there's this other like underrated slasher movie called Happy Birthday to Me, and it's so great, but that whole movie was advertised on like having bizarre deaths, but that's arguable. There's more whether half of them are just normal deaths and half, but the way that the studio did market it was they like made up names for the characters and kind of wrote that like David will never like eat a shish kebab again, and he's getting his like head shish kebab and stuff. And like the movie just flopped. Like nobody went to see it because it was so weird. And I think that marketing these movies, especially for like smaller, newer studios and stuff, going up against big studios with successful movies, or, you know, this movie came out in the same year as Nightmare on Elm Street, right? Like I find it to be a very it's a very interesting kind of situation, because like you said, it's a double-edged sword. You're a new studio, you want a name for yourself, you do something really controversial, you're doing something that's already been done before, like you said, you know, Christmas Eve or stuff like that, and you're getting the buzz, but at the same time, you know, in this case, the buzz blew up into something that basically made your film unsellable, you know, for a certain amount of years.
Well, the first week, even with it being pulled in certain places, like S did surprisingly well. And I think it might have actually even been the same week Nightmare on Elm Street came out. And it's funny to think that that became, you know, one of the Mount Rushmores of horror franchises. And maybe this movie, if it hadn't had the controversy, maybe Silent Night, Deadly Night might have been as, you know, popular as Nightmare on Elm Street. And who knows, maybe what would have come of that if it had gotten crushed at the box office by this film.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, it's a really interesting kind of sliding doors moment. I think that even before it got pulled, it made $6 million, and it like outperformed at least like 1 or 2 days or something. I was reading about it. So like, there is a different version. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, maybe getting like comedy rap albums with like a murderous Santa, like, you know, 5 years down the line, instead of like comedy Freddy, you know? But yeah, like, who knows, maybe it's like Billy, you know, Billy's Nightmares or whatever. But I love Freddy Krueger, so can't complain about that aspect of it. But I think it's incredibly interesting to like, and I say this in my pieces, you watch those two movies back to back. It's a great double bill, but it's also like the tonal kind of whiplash that you get from them is, I mean, Craven's obviously like absolute master, and Nightmare on Elm Street is legitimately scary, but Silent Night, Deadly Night is just like horrible. Ebert would hate that movie. I just know it. From just following his work, I just could tell this is like his worst kind of. Nightmare on Elm Street has a bit of a humor and a bit of a shy. And, you know, and this is just the opposite. It's like this grimy B-movie kind of nightmare. And it's set around this time that's meant to be, you know, so joyous and happy and beloved by kids. And also it has like religious stuff going on with it, which I think also probably didn't help very much. Like it kind of plays into the ideas of like evil, like, you know, strict religious thing and then kind of that with the Christmas angle. There was just so much there that could have totally gone unnoticed, but in this case became like this kind of bubbling fire of controversy.
And do you think this was try to prevent it before it can get too far out of hand? Because you know, while I mentioned that it did kind of get attention, you know, across the country because like there were people going on Good Morning America about it, it really did seem like it was centralized to protests in Milwaukee, you know, at a couple movie theaters or a couple protests there. Do you think that they just tried to get ahead of it before, you know, the thing could just blow up into, you know, absolutely just egg on their face completely? Or
I've always been very interested in that because supposedly there was a lot of letters and people were really upset about it. And like you said, it was kind of making mainstream media. But I honestly feel like maybe someone higher up, like we just need to get rid of this or something. Because to me, that's just free marketing. Like if it happened nowadays, I mean, people would just be eating it up as part of kind of getting the name of the film out there. So I still don't necessarily understand that decision. In the long run, of course, we're still talking about it, you know, 36 years later, or like that it, in a way, it kind of adds to the legacy lore. But I've never quite wrapped my head around the exact decision making. Maybe they got a lot of pressure from like a lobbying group, like mum groups were really big then, you know, these kind of like common sense media type things. So I don't know, I'm very interested to, and especially like releasing it in England, but we did have problems with video nasties, but there's always been like a big VHS culture there and stuff. So yeah, it's kind of interesting how they got to the point where the trouble was like too much trouble for them, so they just shelved it.
And it is very funny how something that can be such a negative like can be spun into a positive because, you know, perhaps I don't know what the, you know, the money would have been made on this film if there hadn't been any controversy. Maybe there would have been a sequel anyways. You know, a lot of times the horror movies makes any money, they make a sequel. But I think because of the controversy, that's why we got 2, 3, 4, 5, and kind of a remake. Would you say that the controversy with this franchise is actually what gave birth to it being a franchise?
Definitely. I think that to make that much money in that short amount of time that was in this, I definitely think is connected to the controversy. There's probably people who would never have gone and seen it, there was people who probably go and see it who have no interest in horror, who just wanted to know what all the kind of commotion was about. And also, like you said, I mean, because it made that money in that short period of time, it got a sequel. And then I think that the nature of the movie and the lore of the movie and the story of the movie being this kind of mythical video nasty, which was one of the rare movies in America that kind of got that video nasty treatment. It all adds up to this kind of wide ongoing franchise. And yeah, and like you said, you know, very like loose remake.
Well, it is interesting because, you know, with Nightmare on Elm Street, like I dare somebody try to make something with that title and not have Freddy Krueger in it. You know, we saw what happened to Halloween with Halloween 3. You know, I think that's a vastly underrated film, but that's another.
Yes, I'm glad. I feel like everyone's coming to that realization now. You know, they did a screening of it in LA before when we were still all allowed to go as part of Beyond Fest, and like it gets sold out straight away. Like I feel like people are finally giving that movie the love that it deserves.
but you know, with this franchise, you know, Silent Night, Deadly Night, the first two movies kind of have to do with the Caldwell boys, and then the third one does a wee bit in it. But as you mentioned, like 4 and 5, really not at all. And I think that the namesake of Silent Night, Deadly Night is the selling point more than like say Nightmare on Elm Street with Freddy or Friday
Mhm.
Jason. So just the name alone, and I think you know you have to feel that that is birthed out of the controversy of, ooh, I got to see these movies of this franchise. There was a lot of like, we're not supposed to see these.
Yeah, I think that's the case, and also I think that's the blessing and the curse of having a character who's essentially like Santa is like the horror character, because you can't really create an iconic horror character that is just the only definition is they wear a Santa suit. It's not like, you know, Ghostface, where they did get a real costume, had a kind of existed and was, but it was not known. Nobody was like, oh, Father Death or whatever. But with Santa, it's like, it's tough because you're gonna have to really do something inventive to have people putting like evil Santa next to Freddy or Jason or Michael Myers, you know, or Ghostface. So yeah, so I think that that's tough, but I think in a way it's kind of, it also explains why the thing that people really relate to and connect to is the title of the movie and the franchise and the lore around it, rather than necessarily an iconic kind of horror monster that they immediately kind of think of in the way of like a Freddy or a Jason.
And you know, I mean, a lot of these movies, like I'm kind of a weirdo, and I love watching like Christmas themed horror movies. So I've seen a lot of them, the good, the bad, and the quite ugly. But you know, the ones that people who are not you know into that, you know, they think Black Christmas, and then Silent Night, Deadly Night, and then probably if there was a third Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2. So you know, for better or worse, like if you think of, you know, hey, what's a Christmas horror movie if you take Gremlins out of the equation? Then you know, it's those three movies, and two of them are the Silent Night, Deadly Night franchise. So they survived that storm, I would say. It did pretty well.
That is really true, actually. Like, I also love Christmas themed horror movies, and there's so many good ones. Like there was that really great one recently, like Better Watch Out, which I just thought was so good. And yeah, it's just very cool and subversive and interesting. But you're right, like most of the time it's Black Christmas, totally deserves to be there. Like one of the greatest slasher movies ever made. It's super radical, it's super cool, it's super scary. And then yeah, Silent Night, Deadly Night 1, Silent Night, Deadly Night 2, and so in that way, I guess they almost kind of carved out the Christmas horror movie niche, and just by virtue of all the controversy around it became the kind of like the one of the masterworks, even though I think a lot of people probably haven't actually seen Silent Night, Deadly Night, but they just know it exists and they kind of know it's around.
Well, Rosie, I can't thank you enough for just chatting with me about this. I've always found this kind of fascinating, and I was glad to bring somebody who knows, you know, quite a bit more than me on to kind of chat about it. But where can people, I know you talked about it at the very top of the show, but where can people go to find your work? And you have your own site, correct, where they can check that out?
Yeah. RosieOliviaKnight.com. It's Knight with a K-N-I-G-H-T. I'm at I have two social media, Twitter and Instagram. It's both Rosie Marks, A-R-X. And you can my work. My article about Silent Night, Deadly Night was at Nerdist, and I write there very regularly. IGN, I do a lot of film reviews, explainers. Hollywood Reporter, I have a bunch of stuff I wrote on there. Esquire, I do bigger comic book pieces, and yeah, and you can just find me on there, and I'm usually on Twitter just like talking about horror movies.
Well, you guys just saw it on the screen, but you don't have to rewind. It's in the show notes as well, and you know, please check it out. She's a fabulous writer, and that's how I discovered her, just by searching her stuff. So definitely check that out, and help support her. So once again, Rosie, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for me.
Yeah. You have a great night, and watch out for killer Santa Clauses, okay?
You too.
Take care.